Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. James crouched behind Silra, his heart pounding as the shadowy tendrils whipped and writhed in the air. The basement, once a mundane storage space, now felt like the stage of a cosmic horror story. Is this normal for you? James shouted over the crackling hum of Silra's shimmering shield. This is far from normal. Silra replied, her voice sharp and tense. She raised her hand, and a beam of light shot from her device, slicing through one of the tendrils. It recoiled with an unnatural screech, retreating back toward the glowing fissure. Great! You can fight it, right? James asked, trying to inject a shred of optimism into the chaos. For now. But the gateway's activity is accelerating. It's waking up. Waking up? What does that even mean? Silra didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, the shield expanding with her movement. The tendrils lunged at the barrier, only to disintegrate on contact. James watched in awe and terror, his mind scrambling to reconcile what he was witnessing with any shred of logic he could muster. Hey, Silra, he ventured, if this thing's so dangerous, why hasn't it, exploded the house or something? The gateway's energy is contained, barely, she said, her focus unwavering as she maneuvered her device. But the barrier is fragile. If the fissure expands too far, it will collapse entirely. Collapse entirely? And then what? Then your planet becomes the hunting ground for entities that should never be unleashed. James blinked. Fantastic. Just what I needed to hear. The tendrils began to retreat, the glow in the fissure dimming slightly. Silra lowered her device, her shield flickering out. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the portal. Is it over? James asked cautiously, standing up and brushing off his jeans. For now, Silra said, though her expression remained grim. She turned to James, her glowing eyes locking onto his. This is only the beginning. James let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. All right, alien lady. You've got my attention. What exactly is going on, and why is it happening in my basement? Silra hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. The gateway is an ancient construct, older than your planet's recorded history. It was sealed millennia ago by my people to prevent its misuse. But gateways are not static, they are living constructs. They seek energy, and they respond to the presence of intelligent life. Intelligent life? You're saying my house woke it up? Not just your house, Silra said. Human activity, your technology, your exploration of physics, your curiosity about the universe, it resonates with the gateway. Your species has been inadvertently feeding it energy for decades. James felt a wave of frustration. So, what? It's my fault for having Wi-Fi and watching Netflix? Silra raised an eyebrow. Not precisely. But the proximity of your home to the gateway makes you a focal point. The gateway is tied to you now. James threw up his hands. Great. Just great. So, what am I supposed to do about it? I'm not exactly qualified for, whatever this is. You will learn, Silra said simply. James let out a dry laugh. Learn? Lady, I'm a graphic designer. The most dangerous thing I've dealt with is a bad client. You underestimate yourself, Silra replied, her tone almost soothing. Humans possess a remarkable capacity to adapt. And whether you like it or not, you are now part of this. The gateway will not allow you to walk away. James stared at her, searching for any sign that this was some elaborate prank or hallucination. But the fissure in the corner of his basement, still pulsing faintly, made it impossible to deny the reality of the situation. All right, he said finally, crossing his arms. Let's say I believe you. What's the plan? How do we keep this thing from going full apocalypse on us? Silra's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. First, we stabilize the gateway. Then, we prepare for what comes next. James raised an eyebrow. What comes next? Silra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back toward the fissure, her expression unreadable. That, she said finally, depends on who else is watching. A chill ran down James' spine. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Silra set up a series of glowing devices around the basement, each one humming with an energy James couldn't begin to comprehend. She moved with practiced precision, her alien tools forming a makeshift barrier around the fissure. Is this going to hold? James asked, watching her work. For now, Silra replied. But the gateway is unpredictable. We must remain vigilant. James frowned. You keep saying, we. What exactly do you expect me to do? I'm not exactly Space Rambo over here. Silra paused, glancing at him. You underestimate your role in this. The gateway's connection to you makes you uniquely positioned to interact with it. Your decisions will influence its behavior. James blinked. My decisions? Lady, I can barely decide what to have for dinner most nights. Then consider this a crash course in responsibility, Silra said, a hint of amusement in her tone. Before James could respond, the lights in the basement flickered again. The fissure flared brighter, and a low rumble echoed through the room. Silra? James said, backing up a step. Silra's expression turned serious. Something is coming. The air grew heavy, the temperature plummeting. James' breath fogged as he watched the fissure expand slightly, its edges shimmering with an otherworldly light. Stay close to me, Silra ordered, raising her device. James obeyed, his heart pounding. What are we dealing with? Silra's eyes narrowed. A scout. The first of many. Before James could process her words, a shape began to emerge from the fissure, a tall, skeletal figure wreathed in shadow, its glowing eyes scanning the room with predatory intent. James swallowed hard. You've got to be kidding me. Silra stepped forward, her shield snapping back into place. Prepare yourself, James. This is only the beginning. The skeletal figure stood in the dim light of the basement, a horrifying amalgamation of shadow and substance. Its elongated limbs moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, and its glowing, amber eyes locked onto James. A low, guttural hiss emanated from its form, reverberating in James' chest. Is that one of the entities you mentioned? James stammered, backing away. Yes, Silra replied, her tone calm but firm. It's a harbinger. A scout sent to test the gateway's defenses. James blinked. Scout? What's it scouting for? To see if the gateway is unprotected. If it finds no resistance, others will follow, larger, more dangerous ones. Larger? Focus, James, Silra snapped, raising her shimmering shield. The alien device in her other hand hummed to life, casting a beam of light that cut through the creature's form. It screeched and recoiled, but instead of retreating, it reconstituted itself, its shadowy body reforming as if the attack had only angered it. Your turn, Silra said, tossing a small, glowing disc to James. He caught it awkwardly, staring at the pulsating alien device. What am I supposed to do with this? Throw it at the creature, she instructed. It will disrupt its cohesion. James hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This feels like a terrible idea. You wanted to help, didn't you? Silra said, her voice tinged with urgency. Before James could argue, the creature lunged toward him, its claws outstretched. On instinct, he flung the disc. It struck the entity square in the chest, releasing a burst of light that lit up the basement. The creature howled, its form flickering wildly before it collapsed into a puddle of shadow that seeped back toward the fissure. James stared, wide-eyed. Did I just kill it? No, Silra said, lowering her shield. You merely sent it back through the gateway. For now. James wiped his forehead, his heart still racing. This is insane. Absolutely insane. You're adapting well, Silra observed, her tone neutral. That wasn't adaptation. That was dumb luck, James muttered. Silra turned her attention back to the gateway, her expression grim. The gateway's activity is accelerating faster than I anticipated. That harbinger shouldn't have been able to emerge yet. James frowned. So, what does that mean? The worst is happening sooner than expected? Precisely. After the harbinger's retreat, Silra insisted on reinforcing the basement's defenses. She placed more alien devices around the room, each emitting a faint hum. James watched her work, trying to make sense of the surreal events unfolding in his home. Okay, you've got to give me more than vague warnings, James said finally. What exactly are we dealing with here? What's beyond that gateway? Silra glanced at him, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. A dimension of chaos. A prison for entities too dangerous to roam the universe freely. My people sealed them there eons ago, and the gateway was created as a failsafe, a way to monitor their containment. James crossed his arms. And now it's failing. It was never meant to remain dormant for this long, Silra admitted. Your species' rapid technological development has reawakened it, like a spark reigniting a long-dead flame. James let out a dry laugh. Great. Humanity's curiosity strikes again. Silra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she approached the fissure, studying its shimmering edges. There's more, she said finally. Of course there is, James muttered. Lay it on me. The gateway isn't just a portal. It's a mechanism, a key to unlock unimaginable power. If the entities break through, they won't just destroy your world. They'll use it as a springboard to spread across the universe. James stared at her. And you thought telling me this would make me feel better? You deserve to know the stakes, Silra said simply. James ran a hand through his hair, pacing the basement. Okay, so what's the plan? How do we stop this thing? We stabilize the gateway, Silra said. Keep it sealed until I can contact my people for reinforcements. James paused. Reinforcements? You mean there are more of you out there? Yes, Silra said. But they are far away. Reaching them will take time. How much time? Silra hesitated. Too much. James let out a frustrated sigh. Of course. So, it's just you and me against an interdimensional prison break. Silra gave a small nod. Correct. Fantastic. As the night wore on, Silra began teaching James how to use some of her alien tools. She handed him a slender device that fit comfortably in his hand. This is an energy disruptor, she explained. It's a basic defensive tool. Aim it at any entity that emerges, and it will destabilize their form temporarily. James tested the device, watching as a thin beam of light shot out. Okay, I can work with this, he said, his confidence growing slightly. You're adapting faster than I expected, Silra observed. Well, desperate times, James muttered. Their training session was interrupted by a sudden, violent tremor. The fissure flared brightly, its edges expanding slightly. Silra? James said, pointing at the gateway. Silra's expression darkened. Something is coming. The air grew heavy again, the temperature dropping sharply. James felt a sense of dread settle over him as the fissure began to ripple, its glow intensifying. Get ready, Silra said, raising her shield. James tightened his grip on the disruptor, his palms slick with sweat. Ready as I'll ever be. The fissure pulsed, and another figure began to emerge, a hulking, armored creature with jagged, crystalline spikes protruding from its body. Its glowing red eyes scanned the room, and a deep, guttural growl rumbled from its chest. James swallowed hard. Oh, come on. That thing's twice the size of the last one. This is a sentinel, Silra said, her tone grave. Much stronger than the Harbinger. Stronger. Great. Just what we needed. The sentinel roared, its voice shaking the walls of the basement. It lunged forward, and James barely had time to dive out of the way. Silra engaged the creature, her shield holding firm against its attacks. She fired her device, striking the sentinel's armor, but it barely flinched. James, aim for the joints, she shouted. James scrambled to his feet, his hands trembling as he aimed the disruptor. He fired, the beam striking one of the sentinel's legs. The creature howled, its movements faltering slightly. It's working. James shouted, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. Keep going. Silra urged. Together, they focused their attacks on the sentinel's weak points, slowly wearing it down. Finally, with a deafening roar, the creature collapsed, its form disintegrating into shadow. The remnant seeped back into the fissure, and the glow dimmed once more. James collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily. Please tell me that was the last one. Silra shook her head. It's only the beginning. James groaned. Of course it is. James paced the basement, his nerves fraying at the edges. The sentinel's defeat had been hard-won, and his muscles still ached from the effort. Silra worked in the background, her glowing devices emitting steady pulses of light that bathed the room in an otherworldly glow. Okay, James said, breaking the silence. We fought off 2 of these things. What's stopping them from just sending a dozen next time? Silra didn't look up from her work. The entities operate with precision. They test boundaries and adapt. Sending more forces risks destabilizing the gateway further, which is something even they wish to avoid. James frowned. Why? I thought they wanted out. They do, Silra said, adjusting one of her devices. But a fully destabilized gateway could collapse entirely, cutting off their connection to your world and trapping them permanently. They won't risk that unless they're certain of success. So, they're playing it safe. For now, she confirmed. James slumped into a chair, running a hand through his hair. For now doesn't exactly fill me with confidence. It shouldn't, Silra replied bluntly. Before James could respond, a low hum filled the room. The fissure, which had been quiet since the sentinel's retreat, began to shimmer again. Silra immediately stood, her posture rigid. Another one? James asked, already reaching for his disruptor. No, Silra said, her tone uncertain. This is different. The fissure pulsed rhythmically, and a shape began to form, not a hulking creature or shadowy tendril, but something more abstract. A floating mass of light and darkness, shifting and swirling like a living nebula. James squinted at it. What is that? Silra's expression hardened. An envoy. An envoy? You mean like a messenger? Yes, she said, her voice tight. They've come to negotiate. James stared at her. Negotiate? With us? Are you serious? The envoy drifted closer, its form undulating. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the room, though its source was unclear. Mortals, it said, the word reverberating in James' chest. You stand between us and freedom. Why? James exchanged a glance with Silra. She stepped forward, her shield activated but lowered slightly. The gateway was sealed to protect the universe from your kind. Your freedom comes at the cost of countless lives. The envoy's form twisted, its light flickering. Our imprisonment is unjust. We were banished for our power, not our deeds. Your power is destructive, Silra countered. Uncontrolled, it would devastate everything in its path. James cleared his throat, stepping up beside Silra. So, what are you saying? You want us to just let you out? The envoy turned toward him, and James felt an icy chill wash over him. Release us, and we will reward you. Wealth, knowledge, power, all could be yours. James hesitated, the envoy's words lingering in his mind. The temptation was undeniable. He glanced at Silra, whose expression was unreadable. Don't listen to it, she said sharply. The envoy shifted again, its tone softening. Do you trust her, mortal? She is not of your kind. Her people sealed the gateway, condemning us to an eternity of suffering. Would you side with your jailer over your fellow prisoners? James felt a pang of doubt. Why should I believe you're not dangerous? The envoy's form steadied, its voice growing solemn. Because we are not all the same. Some among us sought destruction, but many only wished to exist. Your fear has blinded you to reason. Silra stepped forward, her voice cold. Enough. Your words are as twisted as your form. Leave, or we will force you back. The envoy turned to her, its light dimming. You cannot hold us forever, Silra of Vaelthar. The gateway's power grows, and with it, our strength. This mortal will see reason, even if you do not. With that, the envoy's form began to dissolve, its presence retreating into the fissure. When the room fell silent, James let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was unsettling. Silra nodded, her expression grim. They are cunning. They'll use deception as readily as force. James rubbed his temples. What if it's telling the truth? What if not all of them are dangerous? Silra's gaze snapped to him. You cannot afford to entertain their lies. Even if some among them are benign, the cost of releasing the others is too great. But. No, she said firmly. You saw what the Sentinel could do. Imagine a dozen of them, or 100. That is the risk we face. James fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. The next day passed in tense quiet. Silra continued reinforcing the basement, her movements efficient and purposeful. James helped where he could, though his mind remained preoccupied with the envoy's words. By evening, Silra activated a new device, a crystalline structure that emitted a low, resonant hum. What's that? James asked, watching the device light up. A stabilizer, Silra explained. It will help contain the gateway's energy, buying us more time. James nodded, though the unease in his chest didn't subside. And then what? What's the endgame here? Silra hesitated, her gaze distant. I don't know, she admitted. My people must be alerted, but until then, we can only hold the line. James frowned. That's not exactly reassuring. It's the truth, she said simply. Late that night, James woke to a faint sound, a whispering that seemed to echo from the basement. He sat up, his heart pounding. Silra, he called out, but there was no response. Grabbing his disruptor, he crept downstairs. The basement was bathed in the soft glow of Silra's devices, and the fissure remained stable. But the whispering persisted, growing louder as he approached. James. He froze, the sound of his name sending chills down his spine. Who's there? A faint figure appeared near the fissure, a human-like shape, its features indistinct. James, it repeated, its voice soft and pleading. Help us. James tightened his grip on the disruptor. You're not real. You're another trick. The figure's form flickered, and its voice grew desperate. We only want freedom. You have the power to grant it. Please. James hesitated, doubt creeping into his mind. The figure's voice was hauntingly human, its tone filled with genuine pain. Before he could respond, Silra appeared behind him, her shield snapping into place. Step away from it, she ordered. James turned to her, his expression conflicted. It's asking for help. What if? It's another envoy, Silra interrupted. It's trying to manipulate you. Don't listen. The figure's form flickered again, its voice rising. Don't trust her, James. She fears us because we are stronger than her kind. You could be more than you are. Let us show you. James glanced between the figure and Silra, his mind racing. James, Silra said, her voice steady but urgent. You must decide now. Do not let them sway you. James took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he raised the disruptor. James hesitated, his disruptor trained on the flickering figure. The air around him felt charged, thick with an almost magnetic pull toward the fissure. The figure's voice softened, its plea cutting through his doubt. James, it said again, its tone gentle. We are not your enemy. The one you stand beside seeks to keep you small, afraid. Would you not see what lies beyond your limits? Don't listen to it. Silra snapped, stepping closer, her shield humming with energy. Every word it speaks is crafted to manipulate you. You must resist. James's heart pounded as he looked back and forth between Silra and the figure. His mind raced with questions. Who could he trust? What if Silra was wrong? Or worse, what if she wasn't telling him the whole truth? You're asking me to pick a side, James said, his voice shaky. But I barely understand what's happening here. The figure flickered, its features becoming sharper, more human. It looked like someone James couldn't quite place, familiar yet elusive, as if drawn from his own memories. We only ask for a chance, it said. A chance to exist, to prove that we can live in harmony. Would you deny us that without knowing the truth? James. Silra barked, her tone sharp enough to snap him out of his trance. Now. James gritted his teeth and fired the disruptor. The beam struck the figure, and it let out a wail that reverberated through the basement. Its form flickered violently before dissolving into tendrils of shadow, which retreated into the fissure. The air grew still again, and James lowered the disruptor, his hands trembling. Good, Silra said, her voice firm but not unkind. You made the right choice. James rounded on her, anger flashing in his eyes. Did I? Because right now, I feel like I just blasted someone begging for their life. Silra's expression softened slightly. That's exactly what they want you to feel. They prey on empathy, twisting it to serve their purposes. James shook his head, pacing the room. And what if they're not lying? What if we're imprisoning beings that don't deserve it? Silra stepped in front of him, her glowing eyes locking onto his. Even if one among them is innocent, you've seen what the others are capable of. We cannot risk the destruction they would bring to your world, and beyond. James sighed, the weight of her words pressing down on him. I hate not knowing who to trust. You can trust me, Silra said, her voice steady. I chose to remain here, to fight alongside you. If I were like them, I would not have given you that choice. The hours that followed were tense and silent. Silra continued her work, reinforcing the stabilizer and monitoring the gateway's energy fluctuations. James sat nearby, watching her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Silra glanced at him. You may. You said you're here to protect the gateway. But why? What do you get out of this? Silra paused, her hands stilling over the controls of her device. My people are the ones who sealed the entities away. It is our responsibility to ensure they remain contained. That's not what I asked, James pressed. Why are you here? Why not someone else? Silra hesitated, her glowing eyes dimming slightly. Because I failed, she said quietly. James frowned. Failed? At what? She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I was assigned to protect another gateway, long ago. I underestimated the entity's cunning and strength. They broke through, and an entire colony was lost before we could seal the breach. James stared at her, the weight of her confession sinking in. So this is penance? It is duty, Silra said, her voice resolute. And redemption, if such a thing is possible. James nodded slowly, a newfound respect for her resolve forming in his mind. The next evening, the fissure began to pulse again, brighter and more erratic than before. Silra's head snapped up, and James grabbed his disruptor, his body tensing. "What now?" he asked. Silra's expression darkened. "A surge. The entities are testing the gateway's limits." The air grew heavy, and a low, guttural growl echoed from the fissure. A massive shape began to emerge, its form indistinct but menacing. Silra raised her shield, her stance firm. "James, stay close. This will be unlike anything we've faced so far." The creature fully emerged, its towering form scraping the ceiling. It had an almost liquid-like body, shifting and rippling as it moved. Its eyes, glowing red orbs, locked onto them with a predatory intensity. "Great," James muttered. "Another oversized nightmare." The creature lunged, and Silra intercepted it with her shield. The impact sent shockwaves through the room, and James stumbled backward. "James!" Silra shouted. "Aim for the core, it's in the center of its chest." James fired his disruptor, the beam striking the creature's shifting mass. It howled in pain but quickly reformed, its body seeming to absorb the energy. "It's not working," James yelled. "Keep it distracted," Silra ordered. While James fired sporadically, trying to keep the creature's attention, Silra activated a small, orb-like device. It floated into the air, emitting a series of high-pitched tones that made the creature recoil. "What's that thing doing?" James asked. "Destabilizing its form," Silra replied. "But it won't last long." The creature thrashed violently, its movements growing more erratic. James saw his chance and aimed carefully, firing a concentrated beam directly at the glowing core in its chest. The creature let out an ear-piercing scream, its body convulsing before collapsing into a pool of shadow. The remnant slithered back into the fissure, and the gateway's glow dimmed once more. James slumped to the floor, his chest heaving. "Tell me that's the last one." Silra knelt beside him, her expression grim. "It won't be. The surge was a test. Next time, they'll come in greater numbers." James groaned. "How are we supposed to hold them off?" Silra placed a hand on his shoulder. "We adapt. We fight. And we don't give up." James nodded, though the weight of their situation pressed heavily on him. As he looked at the faintly glowing fissure, a thought crossed his mind, a dangerous, lingering doubt that refused to go away. The silence in the basement after the last creature retreated was oppressive. James sat on the cold concrete floor, his thoughts racing. Silra worked nearby, recalibrating her devices, her movements quick and precise. "Silra," James said, breaking the quiet, "we can't keep doing this forever. We've been lucky, but it's only a matter of time before something gets through that we can't stop." She didn't look up. "Which is why I'm working to stabilize the gateway further. If I can restrict its energy output, it will weaken the entity's ability to push through." James sighed. "That's not a solution. That's buying time. We need something more permanent." Silra paused, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Do you have a better idea?" James hesitated, then stood. "Maybe. But you're not going to like it." Silra straightened, crossing her arms. "Go on." "We make a deal," James said, the words tasting bitter even as he spoke them. Silra's expression darkened. "Absolutely not. Just hear me out," he said quickly. "That envoy, whatever it was, wanted to talk. Maybe we can use that to our advantage. Find out what they really want and see if there's a way to. I don't know, contain them without fighting every time. You're suggesting we negotiate with beings whose very existence threatens your world," Silra said, her tone sharp. "That is beyond reckless. And doing the same thing over and over, hoping it works, isn't." James shot back. Look, I don't trust them any more than you do, but if we can figure out what they're after, really after, we might have a chance to end this without turning my house into a war zone. Silra stared at him, her jaw tight. You don't understand what you're proposing. The entities excel at manipulation. They will twist your words, your thoughts, even your memories. You'll lose before you've even begun. Maybe, James admitted. But isn't it worth trying? If there's even a chance to stop this without risking everything, don't we owe it to ourselves to take it? For a long moment, Silra said nothing. Then she sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. If we do this, we do it my way. I will mediate the negotiation, and you will not speak unless I allow it. Understood? James nodded. Deal. The next day, Silra prepared a small, circular device she called a containment amplifier. This will create a controlled space within which the envoy can manifest, she explained. It won't be able to harm us directly, but the containment is not foolproof. If it senses weakness, it will exploit it. Great, James muttered. No pressure. They activated the amplifier near the fissure, and almost immediately, the air grew thick with energy. The gateway shimmered, and the same swirling mass of light and shadow appeared, coalescing into the form of the envoy. You summon us, it said, its voice reverberating through the room. Why? Silra stepped forward, her shield active but lowered. We wish to understand your purpose. What is it you seek from this world? The envoy's form shifted, its light pulsating rhythmically. We seek freedom. Your kind and hers imprisoned us unjustly. We wish only to return to the planes from which we were torn. Silra's expression remained unreadable. And in doing so, you would bring destruction to countless lives. The envoy's form stilled. Not all of us. Some seek vengeance, yes, but many desire only peace. Must we all be condemned for the actions of a few? James watched the exchange, his heart pounding. The envoy's words felt eerily genuine, but he couldn't shake Silra's warnings. How do we know you're telling the truth? James blurted, earning a sharp look from Silra. The envoy turned its attention to him, its light dimming slightly. You don't. But what is truth, mortal? Is it not shaped by perspective, by fear and hope? Consider this, if you were imprisoned for eternity, would you not seek to escape? James opened his mouth to respond, but Silra cut him off. Enough. Your words are meaningless without proof. If there are truly those among you who desire peace, bring them forth. Show us that they can be trusted. The envoy's light pulsed brighter. You demand much, Veilthar. Trust is not given lightly, especially to those who wield the chains of our captivity. Then you leave us no choice but to continue fighting, Silra said coldly. The envoy's form flickered, as though considering her words. There is one, it said finally. One who might parley with you. But they will not come willingly. You must seek them out, deep within the void. Silra's expression hardened. The void is perilous. Even for you. It is the only way, the envoy replied. Their voice carries weight among us. If they speak for peace, others will listen. The envoy began to dissolve, its form unraveling like smoke. Decide quickly, mortals. The gateway will not remain stable for long. As the room returned to silence, James turned to Silra. What do we do? Silra's gaze was distant, her expression troubled. The void is a realm of chaos, where even the strongest minds can be lost. If we go, there is no guarantee we will return. James squared his shoulders. But if this could stop the attacks, isn't it worth the risk? Silra studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But we must prepare. The journey will test us in ways you cannot imagine. The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Silra outfitted James with protective gear and a device she called a psychic stabilizer. This will shield your mind from the void's influence, she explained. But it won't make you immune. You must remain focused at all times. Got it, James said, though his palms were slick with sweat. Silra activated a portal device near the fissure, its swirling energy a stark contrast to the jagged tear in reality. When we step through, she said, stay close. The void is disorienting, and if we're separated, you may never find your way back. James swallowed hard and nodded. Together, they stepped into the portal, the world around them dissolving into a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. The void was unlike anything James had ever experienced. It was a place of shifting colors and shapes, where time and space seemed to lose all meaning. Voices whispered in his ears, calling his name, urging him to follow. Focus, James, Silra's voice cut through the chaos. Ignore the whispers. They're not real. He nodded, gripping the stabilizer tightly as they pressed forward. In the distance, a faint light appeared, growing brighter as they approached. There, Silra said, her voice tense. That must be the one the envoy spoke of. As they drew closer, the light resolved into a figure, a being of pure, radiant energy, its form both beautiful and terrifying. Who comes before me? The figure demanded, its voice resonating with power. Silra stepped forward. We seek peace. Will you help us? The figure studied them, its light flickering. Peace is a fragile thing, Veilfar. Are you prepared to pay the price it demands? James exchanged a glance with Silra, his heart pounding. What price? He asked. The figure's gaze seemed to pierce through him. That remains to be seen. The radiant figure's light pulsed in the silence of the void, bathing James and Silra in an otherworldly glow. Its voice resonated through the space like 1,000 whispers converging. The price of peace, it repeated, is sacrifice. To bridge the divide between your kind and mine, there must be a relinquishment, a willingness to let go of something deeply held. Silra stepped forward, her shield shimmering faintly in the void's distorted light. You speak in riddles. Be clear. What must be sacrificed? The figure's gaze shifted toward her, its light softening. The gateway you guard is a wound, torn in the fabric of existence. To heal it, a part of you must merge with it, binding your essence to the seal. Only then can balance be restored. Silra's expression didn't falter, but James saw the tension in her posture. And what happens to me if I do this? You will cease to exist as you are, the figure said. You will become part of the gateway, eternal yet formless. A sentinel without body or will, existing solely to maintain the barrier. James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. You're asking her to, what? Sacrifice her life? That's not peace. That's, he trailed off, his voice trembling. The figure turned to him, its light intensifying. Peace is not without cost, mortal. It requires courage, understanding, and, at times, the ultimate gift. But it is not her alone who must decide. James frowned. What do you mean? To ensure the seal holds, both of you must contribute. You share a bond now, however tenuous. That connection is what makes this possible. Silra's eyes widened slightly, and she glanced at James. Both of us? Yes, the figure replied. A piece of each of you must be offered, your memories, your fears, your hopes. It is the blending of mortal and Veilfar that will create the strength needed to contain the rift. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Silra's calm, calculating demeanor didn't waver, but James could see the conflict behind her glowing eyes. Is there no other way? She asked finally. The figure's light dimmed, as if in sympathy. There is always another way. But it would mean endless conflict, lives lost, and worlds consumed. This is the only path to true resolution. James ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He thought of his house, the quiet life he'd built there, the memories of family gatherings, and the plans for the future that now seemed so distant. "What happens to us if we do this?" he asked. The figure tilted its head, its light rippling like waves. "You will remain, though changed. Your minds will carry the burden of the seal, tethered to the gateway even from afar. You will feel its pulse, its struggles, and its triumphs. It will demand much, but you will endure." Silra turned to James, her expression unreadable. "This isn't your fight," she said quietly. "You don't have to do this." James barked a laugh, the sound tinged with nervousness. "Not my fight. Silra, this whole mess landed in my basement. If I walk away now, what happens when it spills out and swallows my town? My planet?" She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're braver than you look. And you're not as scary as you pretend to be," James shot back, managing a faint smile. Silra turned back to the figure. "We will do it. Tell us what must be done." The figure raised its hands, and the void around them began to shift. Colors bled into one another, forming intricate patterns that pulsed in time with the fissure's energy. "Place your hands upon the gateway," it instructed. A portion of the swirling pattern solidified, forming an archway of glowing light. James and Silra exchanged a glance before stepping forward. "Whatever happens," James said, his voice steady despite his fear, "at least we tried." Silra nodded. "And that is all anyone can ask." Together, they reached out, their hands touching the glowing surface of the archway. The moment their hands connected, a surge of energy coursed through them. James gasped as his mind was flooded with memories, not just his own, but Silra's as well. He saw her world, a vibrant realm of towering spires and crystalline oceans. He felt her pride as a guardian, her heartbreak at losing the colony she'd sworn to protect, and the unyielding resolve that had brought her to this moment. Silra, in turn, saw glimpses of James's life. She felt his quiet determination, his longing for connection, and his relentless curiosity. Their thoughts intertwined, blending into a shared understanding that transcended words. The figure's voice echoed through their minds. "Hold fast. The seal is forming." Pain flared as fragments of their essence were drawn into the gateway. James felt as if pieces of his soul were being unraveled, yet there was no fear, only a strange, profound sense of purpose. Silra gritted her teeth, her glow intensifying as she poured her energy into the seal. "It's working," she said, her voice strained but resolute. The gateway pulsed violently, and for a moment, James thought it might tear them apart. But then the energy stabilized, the swirling light coalescing into a steady, radiant glow. When the process finally ended, James and Silra collapsed to the ground, their bodies trembling. The gateway shimmered faintly, its jagged edges smoothed into a stable, glowing arch. "You have done well," the figure said, its voice filled with quiet reverence. "The seal will hold. The entities are contained." James sat up slowly, his head pounding. "That was intense." Silra managed a weak smile. "You're still in one piece. That's a good sign." The figure began to fade, its light dissipating into the void. "Your bond has saved this world. But remember, the gateway remains your charge. Guard it well, for the balance is fragile." As the figure vanished, the void around them dissolved, returning them to the basement. The room was eerily quiet, the faint hum of the stabilized gateway the only sound. James leaned against the wall, exhaustion written across his face. "So, what now?" Silra stood, her movements slower than usual. "We maintain the seal. We remain vigilant." James nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Guess that makes us partners." Silra raised an eyebrow. "Partners?" "Yeah," James said. "You keep the alien tech running, I'll make the coffee." For the first time, Silra laughed, a soft, genuine sound that filled the space with warmth. "Very well," she said. But I take mine black. James chuckled, the weight of their ordeal lifting just slightly. For now, the gateway was secure, and while the future remained uncertain, they would face it together. The days following the stabilization of the gateway were a strange blend of normalcy and vigilance. On the surface, life in James's house returned to something resembling routine. The dishes still needed washing, the lawn still needed mowing, and Silra still made biting comments about human inefficiency. But beneath the surface, things had changed irrevocably. The gateway hummed faintly in the basement, its glow a constant reminder of the tenuous balance they'd achieved. James could feel it sometimes, a subtle pulse in the back of his mind, like a distant heartbeat. Silra, too, seemed more attuned to its presence, her usually sharp demeanor softening into quiet focus whenever she worked on the containment mechanisms. Their uneasy peace was shattered one evening when the hum of the gateway suddenly spiked, the walls of the house vibrating with its intensity. James bolted from his chair, nearly spilling his coffee. "What the hell is that?" Silra was already moving, her shield flickering to life as she sprinted toward the basement. "The gateway is destabilizing." James followed, his heart pounding. When they reached the basement, the sight before them was enough to stop him in his tracks. The gateway, once a stable arch of light, was now writhing violently. Tendrils of energy lashed out, leaving scorch marks on the walls. In the center of the arch, a figure was forming, a humanoid shape flickering between solidity and translucence. "Is that?" James began. "No," Silra said sharply. "It's not one of the entities. It's something else." The figure solidified further, stepping through the gateway with an eerie grace. It was tall and lean, its features sharp and angular. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its skin shimmered like liquid metal. "Who are you?" Silra demanded, her shield raised. The being tilted its head, its expression unreadable. "I am the Warden," it said, its voice resonating with a strange harmony. "Guardian of the Void. You have meddled with forces beyond your comprehension." James frowned. "Meddled? We just saved this place from collapsing into a nightmare." "You're welcome." The Warden's gaze shifted to him, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You have delayed the inevitable, human. The seal you created is fragile. The entities will not remain contained for long." Silra stepped forward, her stance unwavering. "Then help us. If you're the Warden, this is your domain. You must have the knowledge to strengthen the seal." The Warden's expression remained impassive. "The void is not my domain. It is my prison. I was bound here long ago, as punishment for my failure to protect the balance." James exchanged a glance with Silra. "Sounds like we're in the same boat," he said. The Warden's gaze flicked between them, its light dimming slightly. "Perhaps. But my presence here disrupts the seal further. If I remain, I will accelerate the gateway's collapse." Silra's jaw tightened. "Then why are you here?" "To warn you," the Warden replied. "The seal is not enough. To truly contain the rift, you must destroy its anchor." "What anchor?" James asked. The Warden raised a hand, and an image appeared in the air, a swirling mass of energy deep within the void, its tendrils stretching toward countless worlds. "This is the anchor. It is the source of the entity's power. As long as it exists, the gateway will remain a threat." Silra studied the image, her expression grim. Destroying the anchor would destabilize the void itself. The consequences could be catastrophic. "True," the Warden said. "But it is the only way to end this cycle. You must decide, risk everything to destroy the anchor, or continue to fight a losing battle." The Warden vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving James and Silra alone with the now stabilized gateway. James leaned against the wall, running a hand through his hair. "Well, that's just great. Save the house, save the town, now we've got to save the universe." Silra's gaze remained fixed on the gateway. The warden isn't wrong. The seal won't hold forever. We've bought time, but not a solution. James sighed. Okay, let's say we go after this anchor. How do we even get there? The void isn't exactly on Google Maps. Silra turned to him, her expression determined. The warden's appearance wasn't random. It gave us the information we need to locate the anchor. With the right calibrations, I can adapt the portal device to take us there. Of course you can, James muttered. And once we get there, do we just punch it until it breaks? Silra allowed herself a faint smile. Not quite. The anchor is likely protected by layers of defense, both physical and metaphysical. We'll need to rely on strategy, not brute force. Great, James said. So, just another day at the office. Preparation for the journey was unlike anything James had ever experienced. Silra worked tirelessly, modifying their equipment and constructing a device she called a nullifier, designed to disrupt the anchor's energy field. Will this actually work? James asked, watching her adjust the intricate machinery. It will, she said without hesitation. But it will require precise timing. Once activated, the nullifier will create a feedback loop that should destabilize the anchor. However, we'll have a narrow window to escape before the void collapses around us. No pressure, James muttered. As the portal device whirred to life, Silra handed him a small, glowing sphere. This is a stabilization beacon. If we're separated, activate it. It will guide you back to the portal. James took the sphere, his grip tightening around it. Got it. And Silra? If this goes sideways? It won't, she said firmly. Yeah, but if it does, James persisted, I just want to say thanks. For everything. Silra's expression softened slightly. Likewise, James. The portal flared open, its swirling light casting strange shadows across the basement walls. Ready? Silra asked. As I'll ever be, James replied. Together, they stepped into the void, the air crackling with energy as the portal closed behind them. The journey to the anchor was unlike anything James had ever experienced. The void seemed to shift and twist around them, its chaotic energy pressing against their minds. Silra's stabilizer kept them on course, but the whispers in the void grew louder with every step. Finally, they reached the anchor, a massive, pulsating sphere of energy, its tendrils stretching out like the roots of a tree. Let's do this, Silra said, activating the nullifier. As the device began to hum, the anchor's tendrils writhed violently, lashing out with bursts of energy. James and Silra dodged the attacks, working together to defend the nullifier as it charged. The void itself seemed to tremble, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. Almost there. Silra shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. James gritted his teeth, his heart pounding as he fought to hold his ground. Finally, the nullifier reached full charge, emitting a blinding pulse of energy. The anchor's tendrils convulsed, then disintegrated, the sphere collapsing in on itself. Run! Silra shouted, grabbing James's arm as the void began to collapse around them. They sprinted back toward the portal, the stabilization beacon guiding their way. Just as the void's collapse reached them, they leaped through the portal, tumbling into the basement as the gateway sealed shut behind them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence broken only by their ragged breathing. We did it, James said finally, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Silra nodded, her exhaustion evident. For now. James laughed weakly. Guess I'll have to keep the coffee brewing. Silra managed a small smile. And I'll take mine black. The faint hum of the gateway was gone, leaving the basement eerily quiet. James and Silra sat on the cold cement floor, the weight of their ordeal hanging in the still air. For a long moment, neither spoke. The magnitude of what they had done, the destruction of the anchor and the stabilization of the void, left them both drained and contemplative. James finally broke the silence, leaning back against the wall. So, what now? Is it over? Silra, still catching her breath, shook her head. The anchor is gone, and with it, the entity's connection to this world. But the gateway remains. It's stable for now, but it will always be a potential breach. James let out a low whistle. Guess the universe never really gives you a break, huh? Silra's expression softened slightly, a faint smile playing at her lips. No. It doesn't. The days that followed were a strange blend of relief and uncertainty. With the immediate threat eliminated, Silra began dismantling the temporary defenses she had erected around the house. The once chaotic basement now looked almost normal, if one ignored the glowing arch of energy embedded in the far wall. James, for his part, tried to return to his daily routine. He mowed the lawn, made coffee, and pretended that his house wasn't the site of an interdimensional rift. But every time he passed the basement door, he felt the weight of their shared responsibility pressing on him. Normal life doesn't really fit anymore, does it? James asked one evening as he and Silra sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. Silra sipped her tea, something she had recently taken a liking to. Normal is a relative term. For your species, perhaps not. For mine, this is closer to what I'm used to. James raised an eyebrow. Saving worlds from existential threats. Guardianship, Silra corrected. My people have always valued protection and preservation above all else. It's why I was chosen for this mission in the first place. James studied her for a moment. You miss them, don't you? Your people. Silra's gaze shifted to the horizon, her glowing eyes reflecting the fading light. Yes. But they would not recognize me now. I am altered by what we've done. The bond we share with the gateway, the fragments of our essence left behind, it has changed me. James nodded slowly. Yeah. I feel it too. Like there's this constant hum in the back of my mind. It's not overwhelming, but it's there. Silra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. That hum is the gateway's pulse. It will always be with us. Great, James said with a wry smile. It's like getting a roommate who never leaves. Silra chuckled softly, a rare sound that made James grin despite the situation. The peace didn't last. 3 weeks after the destruction of the anchor, James woke in the middle of the night to a sharp, piercing noise. He bolted upright, his heart racing as he recognized the sound, the gateway's alarm. Rushing to the basement, he found Silra already there, her shield activated and her expression grim. What's happening? James asked, his voice tight with fear. The gateway is being probed, Silra said, her hands moving rapidly across a console she had built to monitor its stability. Probed? By what? Silra didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with tension. Something, or someone, on the other side. They're testing its defenses. James swallowed hard. I thought we cut off the entities. We did, Silra said. But the void is vast, and the anchor was only one node in a much larger network. There are other forces out there, and some of them may have noticed what we've done. James ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the revelation sinking in. So, what do we do? Can we stop them? Silra's fingers danced across the console, bringing up a holographic display of the gateway's energy readings. I can reinforce the seal temporarily, but it won't hold indefinitely. If they're determined, they'll find a way through. James frowned. Then we need to make sure they don't have a reason to keep trying. Silra paused, glancing at him. What are you suggesting? We make contact, James said. If they're intelligent enough to probe the gateway, maybe we can talk to them. Figure out what they want and convince them to leave us alone. Silra considered this for a moment, then nodded. It's a risk, but it may be our best option. However, communication through the gateway is unstable. There's a high chance of misinterpretation, or outright hostility. Story of my life, James muttered. Let's do it. The process of establishing a connection was delicate and fraught with challenges. Silra worked tirelessly to adjust the gateway's parameters, creating a narrow window through which they could send and receive messages. When the connection finally stabilized, a shimmering image appeared in the center of the gateway. The figure was humanoid but distinctly alien, its features sharp and angular like the warden's, but its presence was more imposing, its gaze piercing. I am Varnax, the figure said, its voice reverberating through the room. You are the ones who sealed the rift. James stepped forward, his heart pounding. Yeah, that's us. Who are you, and why are you messing with our gateway? Varnax's eyes narrowed. The rift was a conduit for exploration and expansion. By sealing it, you have disrupted our plans. Your plans? Silra interjected, her voice sharp. You mean invading and consuming other worlds? Varnax tilted its head, unfazed. Survival necessitates growth. Your actions threaten the equilibrium. James took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. Look, we're not looking for a fight. But this gateway leads to our world, and we're not about to let anyone use it to cause harm. Varnax studied him for a long moment before speaking. You are different. A hybrid mind, tethered to the gateway. Fascinating. James glanced at Silra, then back at Varnax. Yeah, well, fascinating or not, we're not budging. If you want peace, we're open to talks. But if you're here to threaten us, you'll regret it. Varnax's expression didn't change, but its tone softened slightly. Peace is negotiable. We seek knowledge and resources, not conflict. If you can provide these, we may reconsider our interest in the rift. Silra's eyes narrowed. What kind of resources? That, Varnax said, is a discussion for another time. Consider this an introduction. We will observe and await your response. Before either James or Silra could reply, the connection severed, the image dissolving into static. James exhaled deeply, his hands shaking. Well, that went better than expected. Silra didn't look convinced. For now. But this is only the beginning. Varnax represents a larger threat, one we'll have to address sooner or later. James nodded, a determined look in his eyes. Then we'll face it together. Like always. Silra allowed herself a faint smile. Indeed. Partners. The hum of the gateway was steady once more, a quiet reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. But for now, James and Silra had earned a moment of respite. And in that moment, they prepared for whatever the future would bring. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon, so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.